Welcome to this edition of the Capitol Brief. I'm Seth Berensweig here in our lovely BL Media studios in lovely Tysons, Virginia. Back in the studio with my friend and colleague John Tamny. John, how you doing today?
Great and good to be back.
Great. I just want to let you know that I'm in an amazing mood because somebody told me the other day that we're going to be done with the cicadas in about 2 weeks. So to me, that's one of the most amazing things that's going on right now. I can't even walk out to lunch without, doubling over with these things, but they'll be done soon, John. So
I just want summer to end. How about you give me something like that?
Oh, no, please don't say that. No. Summer's going to be a nice long time, and we're going to have plenty of time by the pool with our families. In the meantime, we are here to talk today under our program's title is China an Industrial Threat? And I would like to start off our discussion today talking about something that happened over the last couple of days, very recently, in the United States Senate, which when I saw this news breaking, I thought it was a tremendously big deal, regardless of whether we're about to agree or disagree about whether the Senate did something that's incredibly positive or whether it was just foolishness. The Senate on Tuesday passed the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, or the USICA, because everything in this town has to have an acronym. It is a $250 billion piece of legislation aimed at countering China's technological progress and ambitions. And just to provide a few details, among its many provisions, the bill provides over $50 billion to fund semiconductor research, design, and manufacturing initiatives. It passed the chamber 68 to 32. I didn't know that the United States Senate could actually agree on anything. I couldn't even imagine if they would agree on how to take a bathroom break, but they worked on this very cooperatively, committing roughly $250 billion in funding for scientific research and subsidies for chip makers and industrial robot makers and the like. It is something that we'll dig into. It was, for those who like to track the names of these things, just going through my notes, for a while it was known as the Endless Frontier Act, and then it got broadened and then became the USICA. When I saw this, John, in the news, I thought, this is amazing. Not only is the United States Senate agreeing by a fulsome majority to agree on something, but they are looking to put about $1 trillion into R&D, investment, jobs, creating new hub zones for R&D and technology leadership. And I just thought this was just an amazing story. And then I just waited for it to blow up on the news. And instead I was hearing about, what's the latest happening on Survivor and who gets voted off the island. Do you think that this is, for better or for worse, a big deal? And do you think, just from a general perspective, before we dive into it, that people are looking at this the right way in terms of whether or not it is a big deal?
I love that the U.S. focus is always elsewhere.
Right.
I like that we're a non-political nation. I'll say to you that bipartisanship increases in Congress with every extra dollar directed at something. So I think the chance to spend $250 billion, let's keep in mind that the last Clinton budget in total was $1.8 trillion. I think this is kind of exciting for them. It's a big deal in that it's a lot of money.
They get to spend more of our tax money.
Yeah. After that, it's very concerning that there aren't more people concerned about this. You hear me say this a lot, but the future is opaque. If you look back to 24 years ago this summer, Apple nearly died. Steve Jobs was lured back, but investors weren't impressed. No less than Michael Dell said, scrap it. Just sell Apple off in pieces. It serves no economic purpose anymore. That very summer, Netflix was created. It opened its doors. It tried twice in subsequent years to sell itself to Blockbuster. But Blockbuster's vision, much like the government's, was Blockbuster Nights. Just around a year.
We used to have those.
Bill Gates, yes, that's right.
Lots
Bill
of candy.
Gates, interestingly enough, saved Apple from bankruptcy that summer, a $150 million investment that the markets did not want to make. A year later, he was defending himself or Microsoft in antitrust court
Right.
because the federal government thought Internet Explorer so nifty that it would ensure Microsoft's dominance forever. They just discontinued it a few weeks ago. Shows you what the feds know. So the very idea of the political class investing $1, let alone $250 billion in scientific research and subsidizing businesses brings new meaning to obnoxious, brings new meaning to hubris, yet they're doing it. And so it's a shame that it's not a big deal. It's a shame that neither side sees just how foolhardy and business weakening this will be.
All right, so I'm going to take a wild leap and say that you don't like this legislation. I get it, and I want to get more deeply into that. Just to give a few more statistics in terms of some of the mechanics here, a lot of money going in. The proponents of the bill state that it's going to create more U.S. jobs. It's going to create new tech hubs throughout the United States, diversifying more areas for there to be higher paying, higher skilled jobs for more Americans. It's stated that it's going to help improve the quality of cyber technology and therefore is relevant to the protection of personal data and national security. They say that it is going to, I sound like President Trump. People are saying that it's going to be an improvement from a green tech standpoint for greater economic and technological efficiency. It's going to broaden the manufacturing base. It's going to allow continued focus on the advancement of space-based technology, which is also relevant to national security. When I see something like this, and when I see bipartisan support, and in prepping for the show today, I went to my computer and I watched speeches from both people on both sides of the aisle, and it was very, very overwhelmingly positive, talking about providing major R&D. And there was a sign in the Senate chamber that said R&D investment in research today equals U.S. jobs tomorrow. John, it was a love fest. I thought people were going to start breaking out in high fives and hugs. I mean, it almost brought a tear to my eye. This seems to be something that's just all kinds of good. So I know that you've already made it pretty clear in terms of the preliminary aspect that you're not really digging on this, but explain to me why not?
Because it can't possibly be. When government discovers a new technology, in its eyes, you know that technology is about to be passed by market realities. So they want to invest in technology. Well, technology is a moving target. Again, Internet Explorer used to be a great technology. It used to be amazing that you could go to Blockbuster on a Friday night. And so government is constrained by the seen, by the known. Entrepreneurs, by definition, see a future that everyone else thinks is ludicrous. If everyone else agreed with the future that they saw, it wouldn't be technology. It would already be done. The profits would have been had. And so government promises to invest in what's already out there, which by definition means there's $250 billion less to fund what we haven't seen yet, new frontiers. And so on its face, it's just obnoxious and dangerous because capital is so precious. I'll bring up just one example. A company last week called Arion Corp folded its doors. Well, so what is Arion? Well, they were building the next generation of supersonic planes. There's a big competition out there right now, Boom Technology.
Trying to bring that back for
yes,
supersonic
they're trying to
jet
bring
travel.
it back and clean and better sound, all these things. Well, Arion had to close its doors. Why? Because it ran out of money. It could not find investors. You know who never runs out of money? You know who can do a $250 billion spending bill? The federal government. So ask yourself the unseen. Ask yourself what's not being funded. Ask yourself what experiments that imagine an all different future are not going to be funded so that government Republicans and Democrats can throw at the politically privileged, the known right now.
Well, to play the other side of the table, this is largely an R&D bill. It's research and development. It is the most industrially focused, aggressive, bipartisan piece of legislation in a very long time. There have been a lot of very good things that have come out of government R&D programs. There have been things that have arisen from the space program that have created opportunities that have benefited the American public. The idea of trying to create new technological zones, to create more high-paying, high-tech jobs, to give not only big businesses but small businesses the opportunity to participate in this is something that seems good to me. We do a lot of work in the federal government contract space, and the world of federal government contracts has this world of what's called small business set-asides, which I'm sure you probably would have some choice words for, but it does spread the wealth. So it's not an easy issue, but is China an industrial threat? I mean, there was a lot of very aggressive talk about China on the Senate floor, and obviously there's a lot of that talk going around in Washington. But is China an industrial threat to the United States, and including a national security threat?
Well, the blanket justification for it, of course, is, as you allude, China. We've got to keep up. We've got to counter China by investing in our science here and our technology here. If China's an industrial threat, they sure have a funny way of showing it. Because when you can divide up work with millions and billions of extra workers, which the Chinese have gradually entered the labor force, by definition, you're specializing. The fact that the Chinese produce so feverishly for the greatest market in the world, and that would be the U.S., very easily and vividly explains why we've become richer and richer and more advanced as an economic nation. They do a lot of things that we don't do, thank goodness. When you can expand the division of labor, what you're doing is expanding the specialization of your very own people. If the Chinese hated us, what they would logically do is shut off their borders to imports and also shut off their borders to exports. They'd become an autarkic nation. Suddenly Americans would be back doing work that they hadn't done in ages at the expense of progress. So to me, it's just so obvious, by virtue of the Chinese expanding economically, their people being productive, it's been wondrous for the U.S. economy. It's been wondrous for the American worker. I hate to think how much poorer of a nation we would be without China having joined the profit-motivated world. And so I think the very notion of countering China presumes that trade is war when, by its very name, it's mutually enriching.
Well, I hear that, and you're evoking thoughts in my mind in terms of whether and how China is competing and whether they're competing fairly in the United States. China has a reputation, at least in some realms, to involve forced labor. There are a variety of detainment centers and camps in China, including but beyond the Uyghurs, where there are labor approaches in China that are far from ideal, if not forced. China has a reputation for engaging in unfair trade and labor practices. China has a reputation for stealing our intellectual property. China has a reputation for taking aggressive maneuvers in space. I have a number of folks that I know that have some pretty high clearances that say that there's a lot of activity going on. A lot of it can't be described, and I'm not cleared, so I can't tell you with certainty what it is. But are you confident that China plays fair? Because that's part of the argument, isn't it?
I don't care if China plays fair. What you're describing, assuming forced labor, and let's agree that it exists, that's weakening China. When has it ever enhanced a country's economics to force people to do work that they'd rather not be doing? Did slavery enhance the U.S. economy? By definition, it weakened it. And so let's get that part out of the way right there. Stolen intellectual property. Boy, if you can tell me what to steal, let's go raise billions tomorrow because we could do it. The vast majority of things that Jeff Bezos invests in, he acknowledges fail. That was true for Bill Gates too, and these are the two of the richest people who've ever lived. Just about every idea they've tried failed, and so stolen intellectual property, I think, is a canard that we use here that just ultimately means very little. To steal what is working now is almost by definition to steal yesterday's news in an economy as dynamic as ours and the world economy. So that doesn't very much intrigue me. The Chinese with space, gosh, who knows? I think that's a big reach. But what it comes down to, once again, is that the way you weaken a country is by not exchanging with it. In terms of fair trade, I don't know what fair trade is. What's fair to me is if I have the most people, an economy is just a collection of individuals, if I've got the most people competing to meet my needs. That means that I get a raise every day, even if I'm not making more dollars. But it also makes it possible for me to specialize in ways that people 100 years ago didn't, precisely because we weren't trading with China nearly as much 100 years ago. The version of daily work for the American people was much more backbreaking, was much more people waiting daily so that they could eventually retire. Nowadays, people avoid retirement. Nowadays, people cry when they retire. I take you to when Peyton Manning stepped down from football. It was devastating for him. Tiger Woods nowadays has been fighting valiantly for years to get to continue to do a job. And
Right.
we can say that, okay, they're rare instances. But that increasingly describes the American people. They're in love with their work.
Yeah, well, people do want to get they want to get working and they want to get back to work. If I was going to have to retire out of Tiger Woods money, I'd probably cry too, by the way, but that's a whole other story. The criticism from China has been pretty interesting. I've been watching some of the Chinese outlets on television in terms of what their reaction has been. It's been interesting. They have in substance viewed it as hostile. They are pointing to some of the pointed statements against China in the well of the Senate. They say that it is a new mark in a point in history of a deteriorating relationship between the United States and China. They say that the U.S. should focus on international cooperation, not industrial competition against China. I find that a little bit ironic for coming from a nation that does engage in unfair trade practices and steals our IP. But nobody's perfect. We can debate about whether or not China is a reliable trading partner or not. But obviously, one of the things that this raises is a fundamental question of whether the government here in Washington, do they have the capacity to do something that will help to drive the economy forward in a productive way? Does Washington have the ability to make change for good? I'll give you an example. I was going to a store in Rockville recently one weekend with my son Adam, and he said, "Dad, come over here. I want to show you something." And it was a completely empty display. And I said, "Why is it empty?" And he said, "Well, because there were chips in there, but they're all gone in a day. There are not enough chips, and in particular, there aren't enough NVIDIA chips because everybody lines up in the parking lot on Monday morning, and they go in, and then by the afternoon, they're gone for the whole week. We don't have enough chips." I know someone who works in the managing a fleet for a major rental car and resale company. They can't buy cars. They can't, when they're usually trying to bring in a fleet of about 5,000 or 6,000 cars per tranche, they're lucky if they can get 1,500. We have a manufacturing problem right now in America. It probably has something to do with the supply chain issues relative to coming out of COVID. But when I saw the Senate's desire to come in and try to unclog this and try to help create more jobs, more high-paying jobs, the ability to be able, I mean, we have a real problem with the chip shortage in the United States. China doesn't have that problem. We have that problem. In its most fundamental aspect, does Congress have and ability to be able to affect positive economic change with this kind of legislation, or is it something that, in your view, is really kind of a net zero in terms of whether they even have the ability to implement positive change?
Well, it's less than zero. What would Congress know about growing the economy? Congress cannot create jobs. What it can do is extract wealth from the private sector and create jobs that the real marketplace would never create. If there's a chip shortage, that's easy. That's a market signal that will be taken care of in the marketplace. And so I think we have to remember that every shortage in the marketplace doesn't require a Washington reaction. Why is it that every time a problem reveals itself, usually of Washington origins in the first place? Let's remember, we had lockdowns in the past year. This supposedly free nation, and China's the really cruel nation, this nation locked people down. It crushed tens of millions of jobs, impaired all sorts of businesses.
Well, China did that for a little while.
It did, but we're the United States, and we
Right.
acted like a sick authoritarian country. And so that on its own, I don't see why we always have to empower government when something seems amiss in the economy. What is it they can produce? We're talking about the people who gave us the DMV and the passport office. What
You
is
don't
it
like
about?
hanging out in the DMV?
Something about it. I can't quite put my finger on it.
Right.
Now you look at it more broadly. We've got to stress that we've seen this movie before. Every generation has its economic boogeyman, and it's rooted in staggering ignorance about what drives economic progress. It's assumed that a country rising economically is a threat. And so Japan was the threat in the 1980s. Can we point out that the Japanese, literally as a country, were homeless just 40 years before 1985, as in their housing stock had been eviscerated completely? Were we better off then, or were we better off by the 1980s than when the Japanese were producing feverishly for us? I think we know the answer, that they made cars for us, TVs for us, enabled a massive surge of technological advance in Silicon Valley that rendered it the richest region of economic growth in the world.
So you're seeing a historic parallel here.
Unquestionably, China is the Japan of the 2020s. It's another country that in the 1980s, let's remember, when we were worried about Japan, oh wait, Japan's going to take us over, and oh my God, what are they going to do? They're investing in us, which to any businessman would be a dream. Businessmen live every day wondering if that's going to be their last day in operation.
Right.
So new sources of capital from Japan. Now let's remember, at the same time that Japan was doing this, when they were thriving economically to our betterment, the word on kitchen tables in the United States was finish your meal, they're starving in China. I submit to you, we were much less safe vis-a-vis the Chinese in the 1980s when they had zero rooting interest in our economy relative to today, where if they ever presumed to become not a competitor, not a producer of materials for us, not an exporter to us, if they ever presumed to become a military threat, think how disastrous that would be for their economy. Going after their top market would be the equivalent of Gucci firebombing Beverly Hills and Fifth Avenue. You could do it, but where are your customers going to be? For China to go to war with us today would be incredibly economically crippling. And to me, that is the ultimate foreign policy that we have today. Trade, we're instead demonizing them.
We got to get you a gig in China, because I love your approach on China, and you are so optimistic on that, and I'm not knocking it. I swear I'm not knocking it. I think it's actually very constructive, and it's very specifically fact-based. My only problem with it is that I think that President Xi really needs to sit down and have a piece of that chocolate cake with you that President Trump was bragging about to Maria Bartiromo, because first of all, for two reasons. First, chocolate cake is delicious. But secondly, because they fundamentally really seem to have a problem communicating and demonstrating to both parties in Washington and a lot of people in the United States that they don't have malintent in terms of their economic practices, their economic espionage, their aggressive activities in across the world and in outer space. And I agree with you that the economic interdependence is something that can provide an opportunity for cooperation and partnership. It's just fascinating, though. Maybe at least in small part, it might be a PR issue, but I see China. Obviously, it's not going to shock you to hear I see China differently than you do, but I also think that there are a lot of opportunities for them to be able to work cooperatively together. Of course, a big difference between Japan and China is that Japan is a democracy and China is not a democracy, uses technology to imprison their people, is digitizing the yuan to be able to further take over their data, and throws Uyghurs into detention facilities. But, I'm sure people can agree to disagree on that, but certainly China's to be admired in terms of a lot of the technological progress that it's made in terms of EV technology, 5G technology. I think they're probably running circles around us on that right now. But just to kind of bring this in for a landing, where do you see this as the future? Do you see the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act passing and being signed into law by President Biden, and ultimately, where do you see the United States-China relationship as it relates to this whole technology and industrial space?
Well, I have no doubt that this is going to pass because politicians exist to spend, and this is $250 billion worth of spending. Will it strengthen U.S. businesses? By definition, it won't. Money from government, subsidy from government, blinds you to market signals. When you have money coming in no matter what, when you don't have to worry about whether investors in the real marketplace are going to fund you, it allows you to rush less quickly to your mistakes and fix them. So this will weaken U.S. business to the extent it's hard to say.
You believe it'll harm U.S. business?
By definition. When does it help a business to be blinded to market realities? As a rule, it will hold them back to the extent that businesses get in bed with government in different ways and do this. Looking down the line and everything, let's never forget that while this is going on politically, to visit China is to see a people thoroughly in love with everything American. Everywhere you look is a McDonald's, a KFC, an Apple store, a Nike store. Everything is American there. And so while government is this, and while you get different political leaders and all this, you still have mutually reinforcing trade going on right now. Without China, the U.S. would be a much poorer country, and without the U.S., China would be a much poorer country. And so that's what I hope. While politicians are focused on what they don't understand and trying to invest in what they could certainly never understand, we will continue to see the interconnectivity, which is the best thing to do if the fear is of President Xi. Because the more that we're connected with a growing country and that country's connected with us, the much more expensive it will be for our governments to engage in what is just abject stupidity, presuming to manage trade. Oh my gosh, the 80s is calling, screaming for its loser industrial policy back that's never worked, and it's certainly never worked for the country where the government is spending the most money. And so I will always remain an optimist just because I think capitalism outruns the sheer stupidity of government.
I hear you. One of the things that is really never ceases to amaze me is that this is an important conversation, it's an important debate, it's an important issue. China and the United States, for better or for worse, are the most powerful, most advanced governments and nations on planet Earth. This rare unanimous passage of this major piece of Senate legislation, for better or for worse, is a really big deal. And it brings forth so many critical issues involving trade, national security, all the rest of it. And frankly, it's really not getting much attention. It's just not getting much attention. And I think part of it, again, is because people just don't understand what the issues are and how to set the table on what's at play. And I think that hopefully we've been able to make some progress on that today. In conclusion, I predict that it will pass. The president will sign it. I believe that it's going to have a very positive economic benefit for job creation, R&D, advancement of technology, replacing a critical chip shortage that is having ripple effects throughout the United States economy. And I think that it's going to have a very positive impact as the United States economy continues to grow and soar. John, thanks so much. Another great conversation,
Yes.
and we'll see you soon.
Yes.